The night after the government official finished reading the names was one of the longest nights Umoji had had. Nobody slept properly. Men lay awake, staring at their ceiling. Women turned restlessly on their mats. Children whispered questions their parents could not answer. By morning, the strange sickness of forgotten names had grown into something much bigger. Before now, people had laughed at the confusion. They had joked about suspicious mosquitoes, wicked politicians, imported rice, stubborn ancestors, and even jealous goats. But laughter became harder to find when real problems began entering people's homes. The village market was the first place to feel the damage. Normally, the market was the beating heart of Umoji. Traders shouted prices. Buyers argued over every coin. Children ran between stalls, carrying baskets. The smell of roasted corn, fresh tomatoes, fresh vegetables, spices, and palm oil filled the air. But now, confusion sat over the market like a heavy cloud. A woman selling tomato pointed at a customer. "You still owe me money." The customer folded his arms. "How much?" 5,000 naira. "When did I borrow it?" "Last month." "Can you prove it?" The woman opened her mouth, then closed it. Usually, she would mention names, witnesses, family connections, arguments, but instead she found herself standing helplessly. The customer smiled. Perhaps it was another handsome man. The woman picked up a tomato. "Do not let this tomato make the last journey of your life." The customer immediately stopped smiling. Similar arguments appeared everywhere. Debt disappeared, promises vanished, and business deals became impossible. One farmer sold a basket of yams in the morning, then spent the afternoon arguing with the buyer because neither could remember whose account book contained the transaction. Meanwhile, some villagers decided that if names could disappear, they might as well choose new ones. A young man who had spent most of his life doing very little suddenly announced that people should be calling him His Royal Highness. Nobody objected because nobody remembered what he had been called before. Another man chose the name Lion of Africa. The problem was that everybody knew he was terrified of chickens. Whenever a chicken flapped its wings unexpectedly, he jumped like a frightened rabbit. And the children found this extremely entertaining. A third villager renamed himself Professor. When Adeze asked what subject he taught, he replied proudly, "Nothing." The children laughed for an entire afternoon. Soon, the village was filled with strange identities. Chiefs appeared where none had existed. Professors multiplied like mushrooms after rain. Warriors emerged despite never having fought anything more dangerous than stubborn goats. Only the elders seemed unimpressed. Ezeani watched this development with deep concern. "This village is becoming foolish." A nearby elder nodded. "It became foolish long ago." That was one of the few statements upon which everyone agreed. Yet, beneath that comedy, something darker continued growing. People were beginning to lose confidence in themselves. Not their memories, not their intelligence, but their sense of identity. A man could remember every year of his life, yet still feel strangely incomplete. A woman could remember raising her children, yet feel disconnected from herself. The missing names had left holes inside people, invisible holes, difficult to explain, very impossible to ignore. Adeze noticed it everywhere. She noticed it in the way people hesitated before introducing themselves. She noticed it in the way villagers avoided mirrors. She noticed it in the silence that sometimes followed ordinary conversations. The village was not merely forgetting names, it was slowly forgetting certainty. And that realization troubled her greatly. One afternoon, she sat beneath the mango tree outside the school with Obi and Chika. Children played nearby. Their laughter floated through the air. But yet, even that seemed distant. There must be something we are missing, Adeze said. Obi nodded. I agree. Chika folded her arms. Then, where do we look? Adeze stared toward the old council hall, standing at the edge of the square. The building had existed for decades. Every important village decision had passed through its walls. Arguments, celebrations, elections, disputes, and everything. A thought had been bothering her for days. What if the answer is hidden in the village past? Obi looked interested. What makes you think so? Adeze leaned forward. Because every time we investigate the present, we find nothing. Then the three sat quietly. Then Obi suddenly snapped his finger. There is something. Adeze looked up. What? A report. What report? Years ago, while working on a story, I came across an old council document. Adeze immediately sat upright. What kind of document? Obi frowned while searching his memory. It involved land. What about the land? There was some controversy. And what kind of controversy? I cannot remember all the details. Chika groaned. That is not helpful. Obi ignored her. The following day, the three began searching through old records. The task proved difficult because village archives were organized according to a system understood by absolutely nobody. Doors had covered everything. Spiders had established several successful kingdoms among the shelves. At one point, Chika discovered a file labeled important. Inside it were receipts for soup. At another point, Obi opened a box marked Council Records. It contained old football results. But after several frustrating hours, Adeze finally found something. A faded report, hidden beneath stacks of forgotten papers. The title immediately caught her attention. She began reading it. The more she read, the colder she became. What is this? Obi asked. Adeze handed him the document. His eyes moved across the pages. Then his expression changed. Chika grabbed the report. Within moments, she looked equally disturbed. Many years earlier, a small settlement had existed near the edge of Umoji. A quiet community. Several families lived there. The land they occupied later became valuable, very valuable. According to the report, village leaders had arranged a controversial land acquisition. Official records claim that families willingly left. Yet, buried within witness statements lay a different story. Pressure, threats, manipulation, forced displacement. The words seemed to whisper from the pages. Nobody has spoken openly about the incident for decades. Adeze felt chilled. How has nobody mentioned this? Obi shook his head. Because it was buried and forgotten. Exactly. Over the next few days, they searched for surviving witnesses. The process led them to elderly villagers whose memories stretched far beyond most people's. Some resisted speaking. Others welcomed the chance. One old man sat beneath a tree chewing kola nut. When Adeze asked about the settlement, he became silent. For a long time, he stared into the distance. Finally, he spoke. Some stories do not disappear. Adeze waited. They only become quiet. The old man's eyes narrowed. I was young then. What happened? There was greed. He spat onto the ground. There is always greed. Another witness shared a similar account. Then another. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The respected leader of that era had not merely hidden a mistake, they had unwritten history. People had been erased from village memory long before names disappeared. When Adeze realized this, her heart began beating faster. The connection seemed impossible to ignore. That evening, a tense council meeting was called. Villagers packed the square, and lanterns flickered. Whispers moved through the crowd. The atmosphere felt heavier than any gathering before. At the center sat Ezani, the oldest elder in Umoji, the keeper of stories, the guardian of traditions. For years, people had respected him. Now all eyes rested upon him. Adeze stepped forward. She held the old record in her hands. We found records. Then murmurs spread. We found witnesses. The murmurs grew even louder. We found evidence. Silence followed. Adeze began explaining everything: the settlement, the land, the displaced families, the altered records, the hidden truth. And as she spoke, faces throughout the crowd changed. Shocked, disbelief, anger, shame, and fear. Finally, she turned toward Ezani. The old man lowered his head. Nobody spoke. The silence seemed endless. Then Ezani sighed, a tired sigh, the sigh of a man carrying a burden for many years. It is true. Gasps erupted. Several villagers stood immediately. Others exchanged stunned looks. Ezani raised a trembling hand. Years seemed to settle upon his shoulders all at once. We believe we were protecting the village. His voice sounded weak. We told ourselves the lie was necessary. Nobody interrupted. We convinced ourselves that forgetting was better than conflict. His eyes filled with sadness, but forgotten wounds never disappear. The crowd listened carefully. They simply wait. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. The entire village seemed frozen. At last, the truth stood naked before everyone. Umoji had erased people from its story. It had buried a painful chapter. It had chosen silence over honesty. And now, somehow, the village itself seemed trapped inside the very thing it once created. A terrible realization passed through the crowd. Long before the people of Umoji forgot their names, they had first forgotten other people. As darkness deepened around the square, Adeze looked toward the council hall. Something still felt unfinished. The answers were close now, close enough to touch. Yet, she sensed one final piece remained hidden somewhere in the shadow of the past, waiting patiently for the moment to emerge. The morning after Ezani's confession arrived slowly, as though even the sun felt uncertain about rising over Umoji. For many years, the village had lived comfortably with a story that was incomplete. Some parts had been polished until they shone. Other parts had been hidden beneath silence. Now the silence had cracked open, revealing things many people wish had remained buried. Nobody spoke loudly that morning. Women swept their compounds in thoughtful silence. Farmers worked on their farms without their usual jokes. Children sensed the unusual mood and asked fewer questions, though not because they lacked curiosity. Children simply knew when adults were carrying heavy thoughts. The village square remained crowded from sunrise. Groups formed beneath trees. Conversations rose and felt like waves. Can it really be true? It came from the records. But why hide it for so long? That's because people prefer comfortable lies. One old woman nodded. That is true. Then she paused. Although uncomfortable truths are not much fun either. Nobody disagreed. At the center of the growing storm stood Adaeze, Obi, and Chika. The three had spent most of the night examining every record they could find. The more they searched, the clearer the picture became. The forgotten settlement had been real. The displaced families had been real. The deception had been real. Worst of all, many descendants of those families still lived nearby, carrying stories nobody had wanted to hear. By midday, a decision had been made. A public gathering would take place. Not another sacred meeting behind closed doors. Not another discussion among elders alone. This time, the entire village would listen. This time, everyone would speak. And this time, the truth would stand in the open where sunlight could reach it. By evening, the square overflowed with people. Lanterns hung from wooden poles. Women arrived carrying stools. Men stood in large groups. Children climbed low branches to secure better views. One enterprising boy attempted to charge admission to a tree branch. His business ended quickly when his mother found him. At the front stood the elders. Many people appeared smaller than usual, not physically small, but simply less powerful. Secrets often made people seem taller than they truly were, but truth had a way of restoring proper height. The meeting began quietly. The chief stepped forward. His voice lacked its usual confidence. "My people," he said. Nobody interrupted. For once, everyone wanted to hear what came next. "We are gathered because our village stands at a crossroad." Silence settled over the crowd. Then the chief continued. For many years, certain events were hidden. Several elders lowered their eyes. Today, those events will be discussed openly. A murmur moved through the gathering. Then Adaeze stepped forward carrying documents. One by one, she explained everything: the settlement, the land acquisition, the altered records, the displaced families, the deliberate attempt to erase painful chapters from village history. People listened carefully. Some gasped, some shook their heads, and others looked as though pieces of a puzzle were finally fitting together. Then something unexpected happened. Several elderly visitors entered the square. These were the descendants of the families who had been forced from the settlement decades earlier. For years, they had remained on the edges of village memory. Now they stood at its center. The old woman approached the gathering. Nobody spoke. Even the children became quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "My father was born here." The square remained silent. "My grandfather was buried here." A few villagers shifted uncomfortably. "My family left with nothing." She paused. "But we never forgot." Many lowered their heads. Nearby, Ezani closed his eyes. The old woman continued speaking, not with anger, not with bitterness, but simply with honesty. She describes homes that no longer existed, friends separated by politics, families scattered by greed, promises broken, and stories erased. When she finished, nobody applauded. The moment felt too important and too heavy. Then another descendant spoke. Each testimony added another piece to the forgotten history. As the night deepened, emotions began spilling into the open. One man stood suddenly. "My father helped remove those families." Gasps spread through the crowd. The man swallowed hard. "He told me before he died." Nobody interrupted. The man's voice shook. I spent years pretending I never heard it. Nearby, another villager rose. My grandfather benefited from the land. A third person stood. My family knew it. A fourth added quietly. So did mine. The truth moved through the crowd like a river breaking through a dam. For decades, silence had protected reputations. Now, honesty was exposing them. Not everybody accepted it peacefully. One elder rose angrily. Why bring all this up now? Several villagers turned toward him. What good does it do? Before anyone could answer, Chika stepped forward. Her voice remained calm. The truth does not become less true because it is old. The crowd murmured approval. The elder sat down, looking considerably less confident than before. As hours passed, discussion shifted toward responsibility. What should happen next? How could the damage be repaired? Could it even be repaired? Arguments erupted, suggestions spread, and disagreement followed. One man proposed building a monument. Another suggested compensation. A third person proposed naming a goat after every dishonest elder. Surprisingly, this idea received strong support from the children. But the chief wisely ignored it. Near midnight, an agreement finally emerged. Land records will be reviewed. Compensation will be arranged where possible. The forgotten settlement will be officially recognized. Village history will be corrected. Future generations will learn the complete story. Not a comfortable version, but the true version. For the first time in many years, Umoji chose honesty over convenience. But yet, one mystery remained. Why had everyone forgotten their names? The following week brought visitors from outside the village. Doctors, psychologists, and researchers arrived. One man arrived carrying so many books that villagers suspected it might be planning to build a house from paper. The investigation lasted several days. Questions were asked, interviews were conducted, observations recorded. Eventually, a possible explanation emerged. The experts described it using many complicated words, very complicated words. Words so complicated that most villagers immediately stopped listening. Fortunately, Obi translated. What they mean, he explained, is that people sometimes react strangely when fear, guilt, stress, memory, and community pressure combine together. The crowd stared. Obi sighed. They think the village became trapped inside its own history. The explanation began to make sense, at least partly. The buried truth had affected generations. The silence had shaped relationships. The unresolved guilt had lingered beneath daily life. Then the old records resurfaced. The hidden story returned. Fear spread, tension spread, and confusion spread. And somehow, the village's strongest symbol of identity, its name, became tangled within that turmoil. Not everybody accepted that explanation. One old woman shook her head. I still blame suspicious mosquitoes. And several villagers nodded. The scientists looked defeated. Then, something remarkable happened. A few days after the public gathering, an elderly farmer woke before dawn. And as he sat outside watching the sunrise, a memory surfaced. At first, it felt distant, like a voice calling from far away. Then it became clearer and stronger. Then suddenly he smiled. His name had returned. He ran through the village shouting, "My name is back!" People rushed outside. What is it? The old man stopped. Then he laughed. After all that excitement, he had forgotten to tell them. A few moments later, he remembered. The village celebrated, not because one man recovered his name, but because recovery had finally begun. Over the following weeks, more names returned. Not all at once. One here, one there. A woman remembered hers while preparing soup. A trader remembered his while arguing over tomatoes. A teacher remembered hers while marking homework. The returns often arrive unexpectedly, like birds returning after a long season away. Each recovered name brought celebration. Each celebration brought hope, and gradually the village regained its rhythm. The market became lively again. Children returned to school, and farmers returned to their farms. Even the self-appointed Lion of Africa eventually abandoned his title after being chased by another chicken. Some wounds remain, and certain friendships never fully healed. Several elders resigned from leadership positions. Families continued difficult conversation. Yet, something important had changed. The people of Umoji no longer feared the truth, but they had always learned the cost of avoiding it. Months later, on a peaceful evening beneath the great Udala tree, the elderly palm wine tapper, who had first discovered the mystery, sat quietly watching children play. The village felt alive again. Laughter filled the air. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Goats continued committing minor crimes. Some things never changed. The old man smiled. At last, he remembered his name. The memory felt warm, familiar, and comforting. Yet, as he watched the sunset, he thought about everything the village had endured before that name returned. The forgotten families, the hidden histories, the painful confessions, the long road toward healing. Then he nodded slowly. A name, he realized, was more than a word. It was a memory. It was responsibility. It was belonging. And a people who buried their history may someday lose their place within it. Above him, the evening sky glowed gold. Below it, Umoji carried on. Scattered but wiser, changed but still standing. And for the first time in many years, the village remembered not only its name, but also its story. Thank you for watching till the end. This really means a lot to me. Please don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share, don't forget to like, don't forget to comment. Tell us what you've learned from this story. Until we meet again in the next video. Bye.